SecurityContext properties, and our server admin Ronald will, because I can't, he can explain what they actually mean and what they actually do. So that's also probably nice to know. So by applying trying to apply the deployment, it says that I have several violations to the policy on the cluster. So first of all, I should set privilege escalation to false in my customer deployment. So let me do that. So I need to modify my security context. The privilege escalation I'm doing. And now Bernard will explain what this means.
So maybe to take a few steps back, unless you already explained it, I wasn't listening, I'm sorry. But basically, we set for all of your namespaces that you're working in a sort of baseline security context. So basically, when you start to do a deployment of a pod or a container or anything else, there are certain settings that we want to enforce there to be in your YAML before we allow it to actually start running on the cluster. So, as an example, when you got the employee pod, so the first pod, it deployed fine, right? There was no problem with that. But if you look inside that YAML, you will see it already has the YAML spec defined in it for the security context. So it deployed with no issues. For the, I think it's the customer pod, right? The next one. For the customer pod, you see it's an empty dictionary for security context. So when you start deploying, there's none for it configured. And when it hits the cluster, it checks it and goes, no, we deny that. We don't want that because our security baseline enforces a few basics. So those errors it starts generating, even though there are multiple lines, you should try to separate them from each other because there are multiple settings it's asking from you, not a singular setting. And it will all output them on the same line. So you have to go one by one through each of them.
Yes, so
yeah.
The first one?
Yes, yes. I can do the first one if you want. So the first one that is already added for security context, right? It's a dictionary, should you provide multiple keys. The first one is allow privilege escalation false. So basically when your container deploys with a certain set of permissions, you already tell Kubernetes you're not allowed to, in the lifecycle of that pod, add more if they were to be given, right? So if a privilege escalation takes place, it won't allow that. And we already enforced that from the start. Anything to add to that from your part?
No, that's fine, I think. We're going to the next one. So privilege escalation has been fixed by now. The security context capabilities drop all.
Yeah, so because your container is basically a process inside the Linux kernel, very short way of saying it. When you deploy it, you get all kinds of capabilities with that container when that process runs. So one, for example, might be you get the change owner, the CHOWN, chown, whatever you want to call it inside Linux, which are some capabilities that your pod can execute inside the cluster as well. What we want to enforce is that basically you want to run sort of a least privilege way of giving these capabilities to a pod. If your pod doesn't need them, drop all of them, and then next that you can provide a specific list of capabilities that you do allow there to be used. So that way you kind of run a, like I already said, least privileged way of giving those kernel capabilities to a pod. Because you might imagine if you give change ownership capabilities to a pod, an attacker might get access to it, it can do a lot of damage to your cluster and other parts of your infrastructure.
Yeah, ultimately these settings are part of the principle that you only want to give the pod the security capabilities it actually is using, right? So the least possible amount of security privileges. That's part of the setting, I would say. So the next one, which may be easier to explain, run as normal should be set to false. It should be set to true, I guess, not false.
So you already said it seems pretty self-explanatory, but the thing is that a lot of base images that people will use for the application by default will run with root. So if your cluster admin has not set up any security baseline for this, developers can just deploy these images with root privileges, because they by default will use them, not be aware of that, and you basically have a ticking time bomb running in multiple pods, how much it scales over your cluster. So even though it seems like a very trivial thing, it is of large impact?
Yeah, so as explained by Bernard, by default in Docker you build an image if you don't configure anything as a root user. And some people actually saw this, that if you try to run the customer image as it was by default, it will not start because of this requirement, because the default image would run as a root user. So that's why we added the Docker file layer to set the user to user 1000, which is the default, which is not an admin user. So that's actually required on this cluster. Okay, next one. And I think last one, the Seccomp profile must be set to runtime default or localhost. You pick.
Runtime default.
There we go. What's that?
I even had to look that one up myself, so I'm going to try and wing that one a little bit. But basically, it also has to do with capabilities inside the kernel that you can load as modules to a pod. I don't want to go too in depth about that, but basically think of things like, or commands like the mount command, right? Is there a reason why your pod needs to have access to the mount command? And once you get those access, should it be able to mount modules or get more access over the life cycle of the pod? So you basically shorten how much access it has to kernel capabilities. I cannot make it less fake than that at the moment.
I guess the TLDR is you can do a lot if you are not careful, limit your pod as much as possible. So let's see if I typed it in correctly. Woohoo, it's running.
And I can set up here and look up the whole thing, have the text ready, which for most of you will of course do. But like I said to some people already in the workshop, it's important to Google that stuff in a documentation, because you don't need to know all this stuff from the top of your mind, right? It won't do that much for you. The best thing you can do is look it up in the documentation, read the keys of the dictionary, and see the explanation of what they mean inside that YAML schema. And that skill, the more you start using that will be worth more for you than just knowing it from top of mind. So if there's a takeaway, try taking that with you home about this part.
Okay, what do you think? Shall we do the next one as well already, or are you still working on it?
Who still wants to work on it?